Good evening. Tonight is the Torah on the holiday of Pesach, Passover. This time I would like to discuss the question of plagues and miracles. What were they and how many? Now, there are two sources which discuss this in the Torah, oral Torah. One of them is the Mishnah in the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos, where it says there were 10 miracles to the Jewish people and 10 to the Yam Suf, the Red Sea, and there were 10 plagues of the Egyptians in Egypt, and there were another 10 plagues at the Yam Suf, respectively on the first night of Pesach and the 7th day of Pesach, Passover. Now, the plagues themselves in Egypt, well known, I'm not going to reiterate them. They start with Dam, and they finish with the last one being, of course, killing of the firstborn Egyptians. Now, interestingly enough, it does not discuss in that Mishnah what were the 10 miracles for the Jewish people. An actual miracle for the Jewish people was they didn't suffer any of the plagues, which showed that Hashem had the ability to manipulate nature and how it operated. And for example, first plague of Dam, blood. If the Egyptians picked up not only the Nile and the other rivers and wells turned from water to blood, if they pick up a vessel held by a Jew where there was fresh water and tried pouring it out, it turned into blood. But if instead of stealing from them, they paid the fair price for the water, it stayed as water. So obviously there was a complete ability to change nature. We see that in one of the other plagues, plague of hail, where you have not only hailstones, which is visible even today, but in between them there was fire. Now, fire and ice don't normally mix, but Hashem was able to make such a change. And we see it for another example, the plague of darkness, Makos HaRoshech. It had two parts. In the first one, the Egyptians could not see anything. There was everything inside their houses was totally black, while the Jewish people clearly see. In the second half of the period of that plague, darkness for the Egyptians became solidified. That, in other words, whether every position they were in, when it started, sitting or standing, they were literally frozen in place for a number of days. Now, that changing, first of all, the changing and never changing of nature is amazing in itself. But in addition, the Jews were able to move around freely. Now, the next question is, what are the 10 plagues at the Yam Suf, the Red Sea, and what were the 10 miracles? Now, the 10 plagues that occurred are not well known, but I would like to introduce them. And the list is as follows. This is based on Mechilta Rabbi Ishmael and the commentary of the Rishon Rabbeinu Yonah, that although the sun rose after the Jews had traversed the Yam Suf, the Egyptians were still kept in darkness by the cloud of glory. The clouds of glory turned the hard ground into clay, which made them impassable. The pillar of fire, which had guided the Jews, sent waves of heat to the Egyptians, causing the hooves of the horses to fall off. After the horses' hooves fell off, the Egyptians tumbled in mud and could not get up.
The sixth one, when the waters flowed back, towards the Egyptians, they could not escape because in every direction they ran, water confronted them, which is, of course, not the way a normal body of water works. The Egyptians were tossed into the sea by Hashem. As they sank, the lower depths sent them back up to the upper depths. Some Egyptians were covered by mud at the bottom of the sea. Ninth one, depending on the degree of evil, some Egyptians sank like lead and died quickly. Others died more slowly and painfully. And all the bodies of the Egyptians were rejected by the Yam Suf, so the Bnei Israel would see that their feared enemies were dead. Now, those are the 10 plagues. Now, the 10 miracles, which were experienced by the Jewish people as they're crossing the Yam Suf. One, the water split. Two, it formed a roof-like projection above the heads. It was split into 12 individual passages, ways, one for each tribe. And by the way, as Hashem wanted to try to maintain the laws of nature as much as possible, they were replicated in all water around the world, in all vessels of water, bodies of water. The ground was perfectly dry beneath the Bnei Israel, even though it had been a seabed. It was like clay on the defeat of the Egyptians. This was a meter keneged meter of retribution, punishing Egyptians for having enslaved the Bnei Israel, making them work with clay. The water became hard as rock, harming the Egyptians who pursued the Bnei Israel. In other words, the plagues had a dual function. For the Egyptians, it was a plague. The Jews, it was a miracle. The water became, the water solidified water, formed decorative mosaic walls. These walls were transparent, allowing each tribe to see the others crossing, to give them a feeling of security in an amazing situation. If a Jew, while crossing the Yam Suf, became thirsty, he only stretched out his hand, and the wall melted, yielding a sweet drinking water. And finally, as soon as he quenched his thirst, the wall became a solid mass again. Now, looking at all of that, that summarizes the miracles and plagues. Now, the next question comes from the second source. The second source of the question of the miracles and plagues, actually in this case the plagues, was how many plagues were there? There was 3 opinions. This is based on a Mekulta of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and Rav Yossi Galili says, Achaman showed that the following the 10 plagues in Egypt itself, the Egyptians were smitten with 50 plagues at the Red Sea. But one of the plagues in Egypt said, the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. He was talking about the third plague. While at the Yam Suf, it said, and Israel saw the strong hand which Hashem had shown against the Egyptians, and the people feared Hashem and believed in Hashem and his servant Moses. If one finger of God has caused 10, in Egypt caused 10 plagues, we assume that from this, the whole hand of God at the sea caused 50 plagues. Now, the second opinion is, Rabbi Eliezer said, how can one show that each plague, which the Holy One, blessed be he, brought in Egypt, upon the Egyptians was fourfold in character? For it is said, he sent against the Egyptians in his burning anger, wrath, indignation, trouble, and messengers of evil. This is to be interpreted that each plague descended with wrath, 1, indignation 2, trouble 3, and sending messages of evil 4. This quotes from Psalm 78. If then Egyptians in Egypt were stricken with 10 fourfold plagues, making 40. And following the earlier interpretation that the Red Sea, they suffered 200 plagues. Rabbi Akiva said in similar fashion, even showed that every plague which the Holy One, blessed be He, brought in Egypt upon the Egyptians was fivefold in character. Interpreted the same verse to say, He sent against the Egyptians His burning anger 1, wrath 2, indignation 3, trouble 4, and messengers evil 5. Thus, if the Egyptians in Egypt were stricken with tenfold plagues, making 50, then at the Red Sea they suffered 250 plagues. Now, there's a number of questions to be asked here. There seems to be a conflict between the two sources. One of the sources, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, says clearly 10 plagues for the Egyptians, both in Mitzrayim and at the Yam Suf. And there were 10 miracles for the Jewish people in Egypt and 10 at the Yam Suf. Now, however, that does not seem to be the case with the plagues in either Egypt or the Yam Suf, where they have these much larger numbers. Now, so the question is, and there seems to be a contradiction between the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos and the Mechilta of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, where there's these multiple numbers of plagues. And that raises a question itself, because the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos is Star Mishnah, anonymous Mishnah, which means it's agreed to by everybody, and was the based on the teachings of Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabbi Meir was a student of Rabbi Akiva. Now, it doesn't show Rabbi Akiva arguing in this Mishnah, and yet Rabbi Akiva says this huge and multiple number of plagues, even in Egypt, not to mention the ones of the Yam Suf. So how can it be such a contradiction? Second question is, all three opinions in the Brisa agree there were 5 times the number of plagues in the Yam Suf as there was in Mitzrayim. This is an obvious, seems to be an obvious contradiction. And another question is, what are Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva arguing about? They all agree that they disagree on the number of plagues in Egypt, but they all agree there were 5 times the number of plagues in the Yam Suf, which is way above the numbers mentioned in Pirkei Avos. And finally, there's 2 remaining questions. Number 1, why did Rabbi Yossi of Galili not agree with Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva that there were multiple numbers of plagues? Why didn't he use those verses in Psalms 78? And the second question is, what's the real dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva? Obviously, they break up the verse in a different way, but obviously there needs to be some much more underlying cause. Now, one thing to first of all understand is what to help deal with the answer of what happened at Yam Suf, the Red Sea, is, first of all, we have to look at the nature of the Jewish calendar. In the Jewish calendar, it says, in the Gemara and Rosh Hashanah, that there are 2 opinions of when the world was created. According to one of those opinions, the world was created on the 25th of Elul, and the other opinion would be the 25th of Adar, which would make, which would be Rosh Hashanah in the case of where it says first of Tishrei. And when was the seventh day of Pesach and the seventh day of Sukkot? Was on the 21st, respectively, of Tishrei and the 21st of Nisan. Now, Rabbeinu Bachya, in his book Kedekamath, has a very interesting explanation of the significance of those dates. Now, he's talking about Sukkot, but he also says my discussion equally applies to Pesach. So now turning to Pesach. The first day of Pesach is the 15th of the 15th, and that makes the last day the 21st day of Nisan, and that is exactly 26 days after the creation of the first day of creation of the world, on the 25th of Adar, and is also the 21st day after the creation of man and woman on the sixth day of creation. And those two are significant because number 26 in Hebrew is equal to the value of the name of Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which shows Hashem's overall mastery of the entire whole of creation, which includes man and woman and all the inanimate objects, all the fish, all the creatures, stars, everything. And the number Yud-Hey Vav, 21, indicates his name with which Hashem has his mastery of man, in which he controls and determines nature of history of man. And with that, it makes sense that there'll be much more plagues in Yom Suf, where he's trying to show his mastery over man, than he would in his mastery over nature, which Hashem has many other opportunities to show. Now, so what is the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva is the following. The two types of plagues, those affecting Hashem's control over nature, which we see in the 10 plagues, and his control over man, who all get waged against the Egyptian army, forces of Pharaoh at the Yam Suf, is that was what the response to what Pharaoh said. I do not know Hashem, when Moshe said initially, before to send to let the people go, he said, I do not know Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, meaning he did not recognize Hashem as the creator of anything. And he says, and I will let people go, which means, God, you have no, even if you exist, you have absolutely no control over the events of man. And therefore, there had to be punishment. And Rabbi Eliezer says, okay,
we're going to have punishment. There's four spiritual forces which everything in the universe is created. Those are spiritual earth, air, fire, and water. Therefore, each one of the plagues in Egypt had to be fourfold, even in Egypt. Now, why did it have to be five times over? And that's all three opinions, is that it needed to be a greater display of Hashem's power over man, particularly in light of the arrogance and the evil of the Egyptians. Now, so why isn't Rabbi Akiva content with just having each plague being four? Because there is an underlying force known as helio. It's a unifying force that maintains everything else. I'm not drawing comparisons here to any unified field theory or underlying energy, but there is some similarities as the theories of physics are starting to approach the understanding of the Torah. Now, that being the case, as explained by Maharala Prague in his Agadah, right, Isaac Chava, a student, is that that's why they have the machloket, is because do you need, how far should Pharaoh be punished in the Egyptians? Now, having said that, there's another question. Why is it that there had to be these multiple plagues? Why did it have to be against each one of the four spiritual elements? In the case of Rabbi Akiva, the spiritual element in the five underlying ones, and the fifth underlying unifying force. Because look at the nature of what Pharaoh did. By denying the name Yud K Vav K, he was doing not only a major Chil Hashem, major challenge to God, but he has explained by the in Haggadah of Rav Yaakov Avukutsera, there were a couple of considerations going here, why there had to be multiple plagues. And one of the reasons given is that by his denial, he had a concentrated program of using 10 negative methods to break the spirit of the Jewish people. And by breaking the spirit of the Jewish people, he was trying to interfere with Hashem's ultimate plan for creation, as they were supposed to be, the Jews were supposed to get out of Egypt, go to Har Sinai, and receive the Torah, in which there are the Aseros Adibros. And therefore, each one of the plagues, whether it was one part or had multiple parts, each one of the plagues was helping to be a counterbalance to Pharaoh's negative forces. And each plague represented an answer to Pharaoh, representing each one of the 10 commandments, and as going upward, so that the 10th plague was a breaking of the last of the Pharaoh's methods, and the first of the Aseros Adibros being, Hashem, know that I am the God, your God, who took you out of Egypt. Now, that's one aspect. A second aspect, explained by the Arizal, was that even deeper, the practices of the Egyptians in going against God's will, enslaving the Jewish people, were tapping into very negative spiritual forces. And each one of the plagues was a counterbalance and a cure for each one of those negative forces, and destroyed each one of those negative spiritual forces. Now, taking that all into consideration, final question is here. Why did Rav Yossi Galili not accept multiple plagues? Because I think what he was trying to do was to emphasize Hashem's control over nature, even at the sacrifice of dealing with the four underlying forces or the four forces of creation, and which in any event were what we call subplagues. They were elements of the primary 10 plagues in Egypt. Now, the two opinions of Rabbi Elias and Rabbi Akiva was saying it was more important to show all the levels that Pharaoh was being punished with by saying each plague was fourfold or fivefold, even if it diminished, emphasizing Hashem's control over nature. Now, they did agree on the fivefold plagues. And they wanted to emphasize the aspect of punishment of the Egyptians and all the havoc they were wreaking under Pharaoh, even though it's somewhat diminished, showing Hashem's control over nature. May we all have a very great Pesach. I'd like to wish everybody Hag Sameach, and they should have both in Chol Moed and the seventh day truly realize the potential of the holiday, and then start us on a way of building up towards the counting of Sferis Omer and the holiday of Shavuos, where Hashem's master plan is finally completed, where we do receive the Torah, despite even after all the tremendous efforts of the Egyptians toward us. Hag Sameach and good Yom Tov.